Hello everyone and welcome back to Coding with Tom. React and ASP.NET Core 8 make a great combination for web development. You can use React to create your single-page application GUI while ASP.NET Core handles all of the backend work. ASP.NET Core includes a robust authentication and identity management system. You can use the ASP.NET Core 8 and React project template from Microsoft to get started quickly. However, unlike with the Blazor and ASP.NET Core project templates, this template does not have identity features built in. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can add them to your project. Here's a demo of what we'll be creating in this video. As you can see here, when you load the application, a login page comes up. You'll be able to either go to register and register for a new account, or log in using an account that you've already registered with. You'll also be able to check the box for Remember Me to keep the user logged in between browsers being closed. So if we hit Login, you'll see once you're in, it will allow you to see the weather forecast sample component that comes with the React template, or you can log out. So let's get started. I'll be using the React and ASP.NET Core template with TypeScript provided by Microsoft in ASP.NET Core 8. And the choices I'm going to use are .NET 8, configure for HTTPS, enable Open API, do not use top-level statements, and use controllers. Let me start this up and show you what you get out of the box. When you debug the application, you get two browser windows. The first browser window is the actual React user interface, and the second window is a view of the Swagger for the Web API backend. Now, the ASP.NET Core in the project template only exposes one GET API endpoint here, and that's to retrieve the weather forecast. We're going to add other endpoints to handle the identity management and authentication. So let me close these windows and we'll begin to add the components that we need to the project. Now you'll see the project template has two sub-projects. There is a server project, and this is your ASP.NET Core Web API. And then there's a client project, and this is all of your React code. So the first thing we're going to do is actually add some additional components to the server side. We have to add a database, we have to add the identity modules, and we also have to add a few more endpoints. Let's add some packages to the project. If I open up the server project file, you can see there's only two package references right now to the SPA proxy and Swashbuckle. So I'm going to actually include Entity Framework and Entity Framework identity extensions. So I'll paste those in. And you'll see there's Entity Framework Core Design Tool, SQL Server, and this Entity Framework Core extension. And then I'll rebuild the project to include these. Since ASP.NET Core Identity uses a database to store users and other configuration, we're going to have to add a database to our project. So I'm going to go ahead and create a data folder in the server project. And in there, I'm going to add a couple of files. The first file we're going to add is a application DB context class. And the second file we're going to add is a user class. The user class will be the table that stores information about the users, and it's going to have a structure based on the identity framework, but having a class allows us to add additional fields if we'd like to. So let's take a look at what this looks like. The only thing you really need to do is have it extend the identity user object for it to work. And that's available in the package that we included, Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity. So this user object will be the table that represents each user. And you could add more columns to the database by adding fields on this object. Now, if I go back to the context class, that needs to have the following implementation. Which includes a constructor and includes an onModel creating. So this is where you would actually go in and customize some of the database settings if you go further in your project. But for now, we're going to be able to leave this with its default settings. Let me build to make sure everything's working. Okay, all is well. Now to actually get all this working, we have to go into the program.cs and add some more lines of code here to handle including the database, etc. So the first thing we're going to do is include these 2 lines right after when the builder is created. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a connection string that we're going to store in our appsettings.json file. And then after that, we're going to use the addDBContext service to include a connection to the SQL Server based on that application DB context string. So we might as well go and add that to the config file now so it knows where to get it. And I'll go into appsettings.json. And in there, I will put a connection string after this allowed hosts. And just to start, this is a local DB instance. And you can set this to whatever you like, depending on what database you'd like to use. Now, if I go back, we need to add some more things. So let me add authorization to the project, which I can do by adding this line. And then I need to add identity endpoints. So these are identity API endpoints. These are going to show up in the server project as additional REST API endpoints that our React is going to be able to call. So to do that, you add this add identity API endpoints method, and you tell it to use the application DB context that we created above. Now we have another line we have to add down here. So after the builder builds the app, we have to add a line to map the identity API, and I'll add that right here. And then we have to use authorization's already there, so we're good. And we're going to add a couple more endpoints in here, but for now, I'm going to leave this and make sure everything builds. And let me run this. Right away, you'll see we have a whole bunch of additional endpoints. So we had our weather forecast here, but now we have a whole bunch of endpoints that are provided by the identity API. So we have a login. So anytime the user logs in, they have to post to this URL. Refresh is if you use authentication tokens. We're going to use cookies in this application, but you can use tokens as well. They're not JWT tokens, but it's another similar tokening scheme that Microsoft has come up with. But here we're going to use cookies anyway, so we won't need that. We have things for in the future, which we're not going to use in this project, but you can have confirmation emails when people sign up, and this would allow people to resend it or confirm it. We have a forget password. So we have all of these and management URLs for them to change their account settings. So these are fully documented, and Microsoft has made these available to pretty much manipulate anything you would need to, including two-factor authentication for your user. For this implementation, though, I'm going to add a couple more endpoints. So let me close this. And I'm going to implement them right here in the program.cs using the minimal API methods. And here's the 2 that I'd like to implement. So right after I map the built-in ones, I'm going to add a couple more. So I created a /logout API So when you post to this, it's going to use the sign-in manager. And the sign-in manager is an object that handles most of the Microsoft identity functions. And there's a sign out. So the sign out will go ahead and remove the cookie and make sure that the user's not authenticated anymore. So that's what this logout is going to do. Now down here we have another one that I added called ping auth. And what this does is anytime you call this, it's going to return the email of the currently logged in user if you're logged in. And that's what this requires authorization does, is it will only run if the user is logged in. Otherwise they'll get a error code not authorized. So you'll see why we need this. The main reason we need it is the authentication scheme we're using is cookies. And these are what are called HTTP only cookies. So the cookie exists in the browser, but the JavaScript that's running in React especially is not going to have access to the cookie. It's not going to even know it's there. So in order for the React code to know that you're even logged in the first place, it's going to have to make a call to the server to find out if it's logged in or not. And if it is logged in, it's going to tell it who's logged in. So it might as well do that since it's making the call anyway. So you could actually return other information about the user here besides their email if you'd like to, and other various claims as to the user's identity. If you'd like to return that here, this would be a good place to do it. So now when I run this, I should see these two additional endpoints, logout and ping auth. And let's see, here they are, logout and ping auth. The React project template uses the Vite development server for development and execution of the React web page. That's why we had two browsers come up, because we had the web browser that connects to the ASP.NET Core hosted API, and that's on one port. And then there's another port that Vite is listening to, and that's the port of Vite which hosts the React application. And Vite has a whole lot of functionality, which I'm not going to get into, that helps you when you're developing. But for now, I have to mention the fact that we have to change the configuration of Vite a little bit to make sure this works. And if you go into the client project, there's a vite.config.typescript file. And if you scroll down, you'll see there is a proxy option. So what's happening is our web browser is connecting to the Vite server, which is running on a particular port. In this case, it is, let's see, not listed here, but whatever it is, it's running. And the API is running on a different port, and that port is 7249. So the React code, when it goes to make a request to the server, is not going to know about this other server. So what this does is it proxies the request through the Vite server into the API hosted by the ASP.NET Core server on port 7249. So what you have to have are these defined proxies for different URLs, so that when it calls the URL, it's not looking in Vite for it, but it's going to pass it through to the ASP.NET Core server at that port. And in our case, localhost. So it's running in development, so it's running right here on the same machine. Now, when you publish these apps, the project template takes care of that because it doesn't use Vite in publishing. Once it's published, the actual React site will be hosted by ASP.NET Core, so it'll all be on the same port when you deploy it. But nonetheless, this we're going to have to add more proxies for the different URLs that we're using. And now in this sample, we're not using all of those endpoints, but let me paste in the ones we're using. So we'll be using ping auth, register, login, and logout. So I added, and notice actually my port number is different here, so I have to make sure it's right. So I added those endpoints, so they'll pass through Vite and into ASP.NET Core. Now we're ready to take a look at the actual React code. So in this Vite project, the client project, all the code is in the SRC folder. So we're going to make some changes to this. If we take a look at app.tsx, you'll see that pretty much the entire sample application is included in this folder. We have an object to hold forecasts. We have the actual app, which calls populate weather data when it's loaded. And as the data is loaded, it will display on the screen the weather forecast page. So it's a single page app. It's only a single page worth of content too. So we're gonna have to add a little bit of structure to this application instead of just having all the code in one page. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a couple folders to take this into account. So I'm gonna add a components folder and a pages folder. And it's going to make for a multiple page application if we'd like to, and some reusable components. So the first thing I want to do actually is add a home page. So under page, I'm going to add a home.tsx. And this is largely going to be the same code that you see here. It's just going to be broken out into a separate component. So let me do that. Now some of these I haven't put in yet, so there's going to be some errors, but basically the page is going to include an AuthorizeView component, which we're going to create. And it's going to create, it has a logout link component, which we're also going to create, and an authorized user component we're also going to create. And then there's a weather forecast component. And actually, this is where the code you just saw on the prior page is going to be mostly included. So let me do that first. Let me right-click components and make a weather forecast component. And there, when I paste this code in, you'll see that it's largely what was included in the default template. But I've just broken it out into its own component. So we've defined what a home page here that includes a logout button and that weather forecast component that was part of the template. So now we have to go ahead and add some more of these other components. We need one that'll handle the authorized view, and we'll need one that'll handle logout links and authorized users. So if I go to the components folder again, I'll add a couple more components. I'll add one called AuthorizeView. And I'll add one called logout link. And let's take a look at AuthorizeView first, because this is where a lot of the interesting code is. What this is it's a component that will wrap other components. And it will have children. So you can put anything you want inside of this component. And what it will do is it will only show the component, children components that is, if the user is logged in. And if they're not logged in, it will redirect them to the login page. So it's kind of like the authorized view that is included with Blazor, but it's a little bit different. It uses the React mechanism to make this work. I already noticed a little mistake here. The React router DOM module is not included, so I have to make sure that that package is included as a dependency. That is over in package.json. So if I go down here, you'll see that this project only depends on React and React DOM, but I also need to include the React router. So I'll go ahead and paste that in here. Now when I build, it's going to include that package. It doesn't mean this thing's going to fully build. There might be some errors, but actually there weren't. But at least that goes away now. So the React Router DOM package is included, and we can use routing. So let's see how this is working. So there's a couple properties in this component. We have an authorized, which is a Boolean that will tell us whether we're logged in or not. We have a loading variable because it's going to take a little bit of time to check to see if we're authenticated. So while that's happening, there's a loading variable that we'll use. We have a user, which is an object that basically just has an email in it. You could expand this to have other claims and other properties if you like later, but for now, the user just has their email address. So we have those variables for this component. Now, what happens when this thing loads is it will connect to, or attempt to connect, and what this does is use an asynchronous function called fetch with retry. So this will actually try to connect to the server, and if there's an error, a network error, it'll keep retrying until it works. And I find this is useful, especially in development, because sometimes the Vite server will load quicker than the ASP.NET Core server, so it's like waiting for it to load up, and it would just crash, and they have to refresh the page. But this handles all that. It'll keep retrying until it gets some response. It may not be an affirmative response, as you'll see, but it will try. So what it's going to do is fetch to, well, this will fetch to the given URL, which in our case is going to be the ping auth. And you'll see, because that's going to be called down here. So this is the actual call to the method. So it's calling ping auth with a get, and once this finishes successfully, this finally is called, and it'll set loading to false. So the page will be done loading, and we can show our subcomponents. But let me go back here just to show you. Because when we call ping auth, there's a chance we won't be authenticated. If we are authenticated, then we're going to get a 200 code. So that will retrieve the user's email and set that we're authorized, and everything will be good. But there's a chance we won't be authorized. We'll get a 401 error. So all we need to do is, in that case, just return we're not authenticated. So it's not going to change this set authorized to true. It'll still be false. So that being the case, when we come down here to the actual content of the page that's returned, if we're still loading, it's going to be returning this. But if we're not loading and we're authorized, we'll return the actual children that were provided to this AuthorizeView component. However, if we're done loading and we're not authorized, that means we have to send the user to the login page. So that's what this navigate to login will do. So this component is pretty useful. It will wrap any of your other components on any of your pages. And again, I'll show you how I used it. If I go to this home page, you can see all I had to do was wrap it as the parent component on this home page. Now, how do we even get to this home page? Well, in order to do that, we have to modify the app TSX. So right now, the app TSX has this just standard weather forecast controller component on it. Since this is the main top-level component for the whole React app, I'm going to replace this with a router. So you'll see I'll copy and paste that in now. So it becomes a lot simpler. All it is a browser router, and there's 3 routes. So we have a / for our home page, we have a reference to a login, and a register page, which we haven't created yet, so there's still some errors. But this will handle the routing for the application at the top level. So we might as well finish this up by adding the login and register pages. So I'm going to put that here in the pages folder. Called a login and another one for register. So let me take a look at login first. And that is a component. It's largely a form, basically a form for logging in. So it has some variables. It has the email address, the password, whether the user checks Remember Me, an error to show error messages, and we're using navigation, so we have the navigation object. Now we have some handlers, so we have a handler for if the person makes changes to the forms, the email, password, and Remember Me, the click for when they click register. We also have submit for if they actually submit the form to log in. And what that's going to do is validate the data. So if there's no email or password, it'll tell them to enter one. And what it'll do, if there's a successful username and password entered, it will actually post to the login URL in the ASP.NET Core endpoint. Now notice login has two options. There's use cookies and use session cookies. Cookies are persistent, so they'll exist from when the user logs in and closes the browser and then reopens the browser. That cookie will still be there. The session cookie goes away when the session is closed. So when you close the browser, that cookie is gone. So Remember Me being true means you want it to persist across browser sessions. That's why this is the URL with this parameter in the query string. So once the URL is set, we post to the URL. And what we do is if we log in successfully, we redirect to /. Now we force a full browser reload on that. There's a reason, because we want to make sure that the cookies are set. We want to make sure that the whole React app router reruns so that the authentication can be checked successfully. So after a full login, we do a full page refresh. There might be a better way to do that, but for now, this is kind of the simplest way I could find to do it. And if there's any errors, then obviously you say there's errors. Now, what does this look like down here? It's just a simple form. You can make this look however you like. So that's the login page. So now let me go to register. And it's very similar to login. In fact, I won't spend too much time talking about it, but what it'll do is just call the different endpoint. So what it'll do is it'll call the register endpoint with the username and password, and that's going to return, a successful or not successful message. If it's successful, it'll just tell the person. In which case they can log in. So that's how this register form works. I included some additional CSS, so let's go ahead and do that. I'll go into app CSS, and I'll add the CSS that I need for the application. And that's really just a box to put around the different components. And of course, I can't leave out the logout link component, which I forgot to do. So if I go to logout link, let's go and paste that code in. And all logout link does is when the user clicks, the logout, it will post to the logout URL. And it will include any of the children components that you put inside of it. So that's how you can put, it really just generates an A tag, and then anything you put inside it, like text or an image, will show up as part of the A tag. Now this project is a database, so we have to initialize the database first using the migration system in Entity Framework. So the first thing I want to do, though, is turn off a setting in the project. So if you go to the server project, there's this invariant globalization That can cause problems with Entity Framework, at least with the default settings, so I usually turn that off. And once I've done that, I go down to the Package Manager console, and I can add a migration, and I'll call it DB1. So that's going to take the current data classes, which in this case are the identity tables that we don't see because they're defined in the identity object, and our application user, and create the SQL that will insert those tables into the database. So let me add the migration. And then the next thing I just need to do is say update database. And you'll see all the SQL to create the database right there. So now let's run everything and see if it works. So I'm going to go to the, move this out of the way, go to the register link, register. Click the register button. It says successfully registered. Now if I go to login, I should be able to log in using that username and password. And you'll see that we're logged in. And as soon as I click log out, it logs me out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it helps you get started using the ASP.NET Identity Framework with your React project. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. And if there's any other videos you'd be interested in me creating, please put that down in the comments below. I'm always looking for ideas for new videos. Thanks. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.